The evening air was crisp, carrying that faint scent of pine trees that always surrounded the countryside home. Claire parked her car at the edge of the driveway, her headlights sweeping across the familiar porch she had so often prepared for family gatherings. In her hands, she carefully balanced a bag of pastries, fresh chocolate croissants, buttery fruit tarts, and sugar-dusted cookies she had picked up from her favorite bakery downtown. These weren't just desserts to her, they were symbols of love, little treasures meant to make her family smile. She imagined the scene inside: her mother's delighted gasp, her father's proud nod, her sister Emma's cheerful laugh as she bit into a croissant. That thought made Claire's chest warm. After weeks of endless meetings and late nights at the office, she was finally doing something spontaneous, something that felt like home. Tonight was supposed to be special. A surprise visit, a bag of sweet pastries, and a family waiting with open arms. From where she stood, the house looked alive. Its windows glowed with golden light that spilled into the dark evening, painting the yard with a warmth that felt almost magical. She could hear laughter drifting from the living room, the kind of carefree laughter that made her heart swell. For a moment, she paused at the door, pressing her palm against the cool wood. This was her sanctuary, or so she believed, and as Claire drew in a deep breath, she whispered to herself, "They'll be so happy to see me." Claire slowly slipped her key into the lock, her heart racing with excitement. She pictured their faces lighting up when she walked in with pastries in hand. But before she could even step into the living room, a voice, sharp, unmistakable, cut through the laughter. It was her mother's voice, dripping with amusement, and it struck Claire like a blade. "I swear Claire is nothing but a stupid puppet." The words hit her chest like a physical blow. For a moment, Claire froze, unsure if she had heard correctly. But then the room erupted in laughter. Not a soft chuckle, not a playful tease. This was cruel, loud, unapologetic laughter, echoing through the house like a cruel symphony. Each laugh pierced her ears, each word that followed slashed at her heart. She pressed herself against the wall, her breath caught in her throat, her hands trembling around the bag of pastries that suddenly felt unbearably heavy. Her father's voice joined in, Emma's laugh rang out, and even distant relatives chimed in with mocking tones. It was as if the people she had trusted the most had suddenly transformed into strangers, sitting in her living room and tearing her apart without mercy. Claire's eyes burned with unshed tears. In that moment, she wasn't the daughter, the sister, or the niece they had reduced her to, a joke, a fool, an object of ridicule. Claire stood frozen in the narrow hallway, her body pressed against the cold wall, as if the house itself had turned against her. The bag of pastries in her hands suddenly felt meaningless, empty tokens of love for people who saw her as nothing more than a fool. The warm croissants she had bought with such care, the delicate fruit tarts chosen to bring smiles, now seemed pathetic. They weren't gifts anymore, they were evidence of her blind devotion, of how easily she had been used. Her chest tightened, her breath coming in shallow bursts as wave after wave of humiliation crashed over her. She wanted to step inside, to scream, to demand answers, but her legs refused to move. Every cruel laugh from the living room echoed like a hammer inside her skull. She realized with a sinking dread that these weren't strangers mocking her. These were her parents, her sister, her family. The very people she had sacrificed for, bent over backward, for drained her savings for. And in return, they had branded her a stupid puppet. Claire's throat burned as tears welled in her eyes, blurring the glow of the hallway light. She clutched the bag tighter, her knuckles white, but no comfort came. Instead, shame and betrayal wrapped around her like chains. Her heart cracked under the weight of realization. Every sacrifice she had made, every dollar given, every memory cherished, it had all been taken for granted. In that hallway, Claire felt the ground beneath her vanish. She wasn't their daughter, their sister, their pride. She was their punchline. At 35, Claire found herself standing at a crossroads she had never imagined. The divorce papers were signed, her marriage officially behind her. There had been no explosive fights, no courtroom drama, just a quiet ending between two people who had once loved each other, but had slowly drifted apart. She and James, her ex-husband, had divided their lives with civility, almost with too much politeness. No children to fight over, no bitter words. The only real piece of value left between them was the country house an hour outside the city, resting on 2 acres of quiet land. When James refused it, saying he preferred the fast-paced life downtown, Claire inherited it in the settlement. At first, she looked at the house as nothing more than a burden too big too isolated, too filled with memories of a life that was no longer hers. What she wanted was simplicity, freedom, a clean slate. She dreamed of selling the house, taking the money and buying a sleek, modern apartment near her office in the city. Somewhere she could walk to work, grab coffee at corner cafes, and maybe, just maybe, begin a brand new life. The plan was practical, even logical. Selling the house would mean no more weekend drives to an empty property. No wasted space, no lingering shadows of her failed marriage. Instead, she could have a stylish apartment fully paid for with no mortgage hanging over her. Claire believed that starting over required cutting ties to the past, and this house, as beautiful as it was, represented a past she was desperate to leave behind. It was a quiet Sunday evening when Claire brought up her plan. The family was gathered around the dining table, the clinking of forks and soft hum of conversation filling the air. She cleared her throat, her voice steady but firm as she said, "I've decided I'm going to sell the country house. It just doesn't make sense for me to keep it anymore." The reaction was immediate, like she had just announced a betrayal. Her mother's fork stopped midair, her eyes wide with shock. "Claire, you can't sell that beautiful house," she whispered, as if the very idea wounded her. Her father frowned, muttering something about tradition. And Emma, always quick, always dramatic, leaned forward with her eyes shining. "Think about it, sis. That house could be our family retreat. Summer barbecues, Christmas mornings with snow outside, autumn nights by the fire, can't you see it?" Claire tried to reason with them. She explained the practicality of selling it, the freedom of owning a city apartment outright, the relief of living without a mortgage. But then her mother played her most dangerous card, emotion. She reached across the table, clasped Claire's hand in both of hers, and her voice softened into a plea that tugged at the deepest corners of Claire's heart. "Please, Claire, keep the house for the family. For me." That look, the same one her mother had used since Claire was a child, melted her defenses. Emma piled on, painting vivid pictures of laughter, togetherness, and lifelong memories, as though the house itself were a vessel of love. Claire felt her logical arguments crumble under the weight of their words. She wanted to resist, but how do you say no to your mother's pleading eyes? How do you push away the image of family gathered around a fire smiling because of you? And so with one reluctant nod, Claire surrendered. That single moment, cloaked in love and sentiment, would chain her to years of sacrifice she could never take back. The decision was made, and Claire felt its weight immediately. Instead of selling the house and freeing herself from financial burdens, she took out a mortgage to buy a smaller apartment in the city. It wasn't the sleek, modern dream apartment she had envisioned, a space filled with glass walls and open light, but rather a compromise, a two-bedroom unit that was practical, not inspiring. Every month as she transferred her mortgage payment, she felt the echo of what could have been. She had traded independence for obligation. The country house, however, quickly transformed. What had once felt like an anchor of the past became the family's favorite playground. On weekends, her parents would escape there laughing and reminiscing, like teenagers in love. Emma used it for romantic getaways, with Ryan showing off the house as though it belonged to her. Holiday seasons filled the halls with noise and warmth, not because Claire wanted it that way, but because everyone else claimed it as their own. She would arrive sometimes to find her kitchen stocked with food she hadn't bought, or the furniture rearranged to someone else's taste. Slowly, it stopped feeling like her home at all. Claire told herself it was worth it. Worth seeing her mother smile, worth hearing her father's contented sigh, worth watching Emma's happiness. But deep inside, a quiet ache began to grow. With every family gathering, with every holiday that revolved around the house, she felt her role shifting. She wasn't the independent woman she had longed to become. She was the provider, the silent backbone, the one who gave while others took. And the cruelest part, they didn't even seem to notice the sacrifices she was making. To them, the house was a gift, a given, something they felt entitled to. To Claire, it was a chain binding her tighter with every passing year. Every month, like clockwork, Claire transferred $800 into Emma's account. The request always came in the same form, a shaky voice over the phone, Emma on the verge of tears, whispering about overdue rent and the fear of being kicked out of her apartment. Claire never questioned it. She didn't ask for proof, never demanded receipts. Instead, she felt a quiet swell of pride as she reassured her younger sister, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." To Claire, that money wasn't just cash, it was love, responsibility, and the unspoken duty of an older sister. She believed she was protecting Emma, giving her stability in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. Each transfer carried with it a small sense of accomplishment, a feeling that she was needed, that she mattered. After her divorce, when loneliness sometimes pressed heavily on her chest, those moments of being Emma's savior gave Claire a reason to keep going. She wasn't just Claire, the divorced woman with a mortgage. She was Claire, the dependable sister, the anchor her family could lean on. She imagined Emma's relief each time the money arrived, the stress lifted, the tears replaced by gratitude. Claire held on to that image like a lifeline, convincing herself that her sacrifices were building bonds, deepening love. What she didn't realize was that those monthly transfers were not stitching her family closer together. They were silently weaving the chains of expectation, chains that would later tighten around her until she could barely breathe. It never stopped with Emma. Soon the calls began trickling in from other family members, each one carrying a story that sounded urgent, desperate, impossible to ignore. Claire, with her soft heart and open wallet, became the one they all turned to when life supposedly struck them down. Her Aunt Brenda called one evening, her voice shaking as she described unbearable tooth pain. "Claire, I hate to ask, but I need emergency dental work. It's going to cost me $2,000, and I just don't have it right now." Claire didn't hesitate. She wired the money the next morning, telling herself it was what any good niece would do. Weeks later, she would learn, not from Brenda, but from a cousin in passing, that Brenda's teeth were perfectly fine. The money had gone into a brand new sectional sofa and a polished coffee table set. Claire had unknowingly redecorated her aunt's living room, and Brenda had laughed about it behind her back. Then came her uncle, Brian. His request was for $1,500 framed as a car repair. "The transmission's gone," he explained with convincing frustration. "Without the car, I can't get to work." Once again, Claire stepped in without question. She imagined her uncle stranded, struggling, embarrassed to even ask her. But the truth, the money funded a shiny fishing boat he'd been eyeing for months. While Claire worked overtime shifts to meet deadlines and pay her mortgage, her uncle was out on the lake casting lines under the sun on a boat paid for by her sacrifices. Each emergency gnawed away at her savings, but more than that, it gnawed at her sense of trust. Claire didn't know the truth at the time. She thought she was holding her family together. What she was really doing was teaching them a dangerous lesson: that she would always say yes, that her generosity had no limits. And slowly, without realizing it, she was being transformed from a loved family member into their personal safety net, their silent ATM machine. In her heart, Claire clung to one simple belief: they're my family. If I can help, I should. It became her mantra, the quiet justification that drowned out every flicker of doubt. Each time she opened her banking app to send another transfer, she reminded herself that this was what family was supposed to do: stand by one another, carry each other through the storms. She convinced herself that she wasn't being taken advantage of. She was being a good daughter, a good sister, a good niece. But beneath the surface, invisible cracks were forming. Every dollar she gave away was another chip carved out of her trust. Every story she believed was another thread loosening from the fabric of her faith. Claire couldn't see it yet, but her generosity was slowly hollowing her out. What she saw as love, her family saw as opportunity. What she believed was loyalty, they interpreted as weakness. And what she thought was building bridges was in truth laying down the very planks they would use to walk all over her. For Claire, the danger wasn't just the money, it was the blind faith that blinded her to the truth. She wore her sacrifices like a badge of honor, never realizing that those badges were slowly turning into shackles, binding her tighter to a family that was learning to exploit her kindness without remorse. Claire tightened her grip on the pastry bag, a smile tugging at her lips as she pictured the surprise she was about to give her family. She had rehearsed the moment in her head, stepping into the room, everyone turning their faces, lighting up, laughter and hugs filling the air. She wanted to believe in that image because for Claire, family had always been worth the sacrifice. She pressed her ear closer to the door, waiting for the perfect moment to burst in. And then it happened. A single sentence slipped through the wall, slicing the air like a knife. Her mother's voice, sharp and laced with cruel amusement, said clearly, "She's so stupid, she'll do whatever we tell her to, just like a puppet." The words struck Claire harder than any physical blow could. Her body stiffened, the smile fading instantly from her face. For a second, she thought she'd misheard, that her mind was playing tricks. But then came the laughter, loud, unrestrained, and mocking. It wasn't just her mother's voice. She heard her father's chuckle, Emma's giggle, and even the sound of glasses clinking together in agreement. The room erupted in cruel delight, their words tumbling over one another like stones being thrown at her from the shadows. Claire froze in the hallway, her heart hammering in her chest. The bag of pastries slipped slightly in her trembling hands, the once sweet surprise now heavy with humiliation. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. In that instant, the picture she had held of her family, the love, the warmth, the trust shattered into 1,000 pieces. And the echo of that one sentence, like a puppet, kept pounding in her ears, branding her with a truth she wasn't ready to face. The living room roared with laughter, a cruel chorus that burned in Claire's ears. She stayed pressed against the wall, frozen, as the voices she loved most twisted her kindness into a joke. Her mother's words had been the spark, but now everyone joined in one by one, piling their confessions on the fire of mockery. Her father chuckled, his voice thick with pride. Remember when she wanted to sell the house? She was ready to buy her dream apartment. All we had to do was spin a story about family memories, and boom, she kept the house and took out a mortgage instead. Now we get to enjoy this beautiful place whenever we want, while she's stuck paying for some cramped apartment in the city. More laughter exploded. Glasses clinked as if they were toasting to her foolishness. Emma's voice chimed in next, light and amused as if she were sharing a funny secret. And every month I just call her crying about rent. $800 like clockwork. She never asks questions, just transfers it over. Can you believe it? She thinks she's helping me, but I'm basically living off her pity. The room erupted again, their amusement sharp and cutting, as though her sacrifices were nothing more than comedy material. Then came Aunt Brenda, practically boasting. Oh, that reminds me, I told her I needed money for dental surgery, $2,000. She didn't even ask to see a bill, just wired it the next day. And what did I spend it on? A brand new living room set. Gorgeous, sectional matching coffee table. My place looks amazing. Thanks to Claire, of course, the crowd roared with delight, their laughter bouncing off the walls louder and louder. Uncle Brian joined in, his tone smug. Yeah, I told her my car needed repairs, $1,500. She handed it over, no hesitation. Want to know the truth? Bought myself that fishing boat I always wanted. Best weekend investment I ever made, and she paid for it. The laughter now sounded monstrous to Claire, each confession another dagger driven deeper into her chest. The family she had loved, defended, and supported were feasting on her sacrifices, turning her generosity into entertainment. And in that moment, Claire realized she wasn't a cherished daughter, a beloved sister, or a trusted niece. She was their punchline, the family fool. Just when Claire thought she had heard the worst, her mother's voice rose above the laughter. This time sharper, more calculating. Now listen, she said. Emma and Ryan will be engaged soon. That's our chance. We can get at least $10,000, maybe $15,000 out of Claire for the wedding. The room erupted in agreement, their excitement bubbling like champagne. 15,000. Do you think she'll give that much? Someone asked with a laugh. Claire could almost picture them leaning and whispering strategies as if they were plotting a heist. And in a way they were. Only the vault wasn't a bank, it was her. Her savings, her sacrifices. Emma's voice, smug and playful, answered with ease. Of course she will. We'll just tell her it's tradition. That as a successful one, it's her duty to help her sister have a perfect wedding. And if she hesitates, well, guilt her until she caves. It always works. Laughter followed again, cruel and confident, like predators certain their prey had nowhere to run. Claire's breath caught as her mother raised her glass, her tone gleeful and merciless. Here's to Claire, she declared, the milk cow that never runs dry. The sound of glasses clinking, the cheers, the roar of laughter, it all collided inside Claire's head. Her vision blurred with tears, but worse than the sting of betrayal was the chilling realization they had already planned her next sacrifice, and they celebrated it as if it were a victory. Claire drove home in silence, the bag of pastries untouched on the passenger seat. By the time she reached her apartment, her tears had already blurred the road so badly she could barely see. She collapsed onto her couch, clutching a pillow to her chest, and cried until her body felt hollow. The sobs shook her to the core, not just because of the betrayal she had heard, but because the people who were supposed to love her most had stripped away her dignity and mocked her like she was nothing. That night she cried until her voice was raw, until her eyes were swollen shut, until there was nothing left inside her but exhaustion. But somewhere between midnight and dawn, something shifted. The tears no longer felt like weakness, they were fuel. Her pain, her humiliation, her heartbreak began to harden into something sharper. For the first time in years, Claire stopped asking, "Why are they doing this to me?" and instead whispered to herself, "Never again." When the morning light poured through her window, she sat up, her face pale but her eyes fierce. The night had stolen her innocence, but the morning returned her resolve. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, mascara streaked across her cheeks, and murmured words that sounded like a vow. This time the game will be different. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was a promise to herself Claire would no longer be their puppet. She would become the one pulling the strings. The call came just as Claire had been expecting. Her mother's voice was honey-sweet, coated with feigned concern. "Claire, darling, I hate to ask, but we really want Emma's engagement party to be special. The catering, the decorations, the cake, it's all so expensive. We need about $5,000. Can you help us?" Claire closed her eyes, her lips curling into a smile that her mother couldn't see. This was it, the very scheme she had overheard that night. Instead of rage, Claire responded with calm warmth, the same softness her family always relied on. "Of course, Mom," she said smoothly. "We'll take care of it, whatever Emma needs." On the other end of the line, her mother gasped with delight. "I knew you'd come through, sweetheart. We'll handle the arrangements and just keep track of the expenses. You'll pay us back later. It'll be easier for everyone that way." The excitement in her voice was palpable, almost giddy. In the background, Claire could hear Emma squealing, Ryan laughing, relatives clapping their hands. They thought they had won again. They thought the puppet was still dancing on her strings. But Claire knew better. As she hung up the phone, she stared at her reflection in the dark screen, her eyes cold but steady. They had no idea that this time the strings were cut. The bait was set. And with every penny they poured into the party, $5,000 of their own money, they were walking straight into the trap she had prepared. For the first time, Claire felt power return to her hands. The night before the engagement party, Claire drove to the country house in silence, her heart steady, her mind sharper than it had ever been. This wasn't a visit of love or family, it was war. In the back seat lay the tools of her resolved new locks, a hired locksmith waiting to meet her, and a heart hardened enough to finally take action. At exactly 7 o'clock, the locksmith arrived. He was a quiet man, professional, and didn't ask questions. Door by door, lock by lock, the old keys that her family held so dearly were rendered useless. By the time he was finished, Claire was the only one who could open the doors of the house. For the first time in years, the property was truly hers again, not theirs. But she wasn't done. As she stepped inside, the sight nearly made her laugh, not out of joy, but at the bitter irony. The living room was glowing with string lights, tables dressed in white cloth, balloons floating above, and decorations scattered everywhere. It looked like the perfect setting for a celebration, but not for her. To Claire, it was a monument to their arrogance, a party built on the assumption that she would always foot the bill. One by one, she tore it all down. Streamers yanked from the walls, balloons popped under her fingers, tablecloths stripped away. Each rip of fabric, each burst of air felt like reclaiming another piece of herself. She stuffed everything into large black garbage bags, dragging them outside, leaving them piled in plain view at the corner of the house. They weren't just trash, they were her message. A warning, a declaration. When her family arrived tomorrow, they would see the ruins of their scheme before they even stepped through the door. And in that moment, they would know Claire was no longer their puppet. The big day had arrived. Cars lined the driveway, their headlights flashing, as relatives and guests stepped out, arms full of flowers, wrapped gifts and trays of food. Caterers unloaded dishes from the back of their vans, glittering silver trays filled with roasted meats, delicate pastries, and bottles of sparkling champagne. The garden looked alive with activity, everyone buzzing with excitement for Emma's engagement party. It was supposed to be perfect, but when the first guest reached for the front door, the key refused to turn. A confused pause, then another tried, same result. The lock didn't budge. One by one, they tested their keys, their laughter fading into nervous murmurs. The caterers stood awkwardly with trays in their hands, unsure where to go. The guests shifted uncomfortably, whispering. Inside the house should have been warmth, music, and celebration, but the door remained sealed, silent and cold. Emma's voice rose in frustration. "Why isn't it opening? What's wrong with these locks?" Her mother's face flushed as she tried her own key again and again, rattling it furiously in the keyhole. Nothing. Panic began to spread. The decorations they had so carefully hung the week before were gone. Through the windows they could see bare walls, no balloons, no streamers, nothing. It was as if the house itself had rejected them. Phones came out. One by one they called Claire. Her mother, her father, Emma, each taking turns, their voices rising with desperation. "Claire, we're all here, but the keys don't work. Why aren't you answering?" "Claire, pick up the phone right now." The once celebratory atmosphere collapsed into chaos. Guests were restless, food was spoiling, and the centerpiece of their grand scheme, the house had closed its doors on them. And standing outside, sweating and panicked, they realized something terrifying. The puppet had cut her strings. After dozens of missed calls, Claire finally picked up. Silence filled the line for half a second before her mother's frantic voice burst through Claire. "Thank God we're all here. The locks don't work. Everyone's waiting. You have to come right now." But Claire's voice was nothing like they remembered. No softness, no warmth, only ice. "I know," she said calmly. "Oh no, because I changed the locks." There was a stunned pause on the other end. Then her father's voice, sharp and demanding. "Why would you do that? Are you out of your mind?" Claire didn't flinch. Her tone stayed cold, measured, almost surgical. "Because I heard everything, every single word you said that night. How I'm stupid, how I'm just your puppet, how you've been bragging about scamming me for years." The line went dead quiet. Then scrambling voices, whispers, and finally Emma shouting into the phone, "Claire, you're overreacting. We were just joking. Don't take it so seriously." Claire let out a laugh, low, bitter, almost unrecognizable. "Joking, taking thousands of dollars from me, lying to my face, calling me a milk cow, that's your idea of a joke." Her words cut through the speaker like shards of glass. On the other end, her mother's tone softened, dripping with false sweetness. "Honey, please, you misunderstood. We didn't mean it that way. You know we love you. Families tease each other sometimes." But Claire's silence carried more weight than shouting ever could. When she finally spoke, her words landed like a hammer new. "You don't love me. You love my money, and I'm done." On the other end of the line, the voices grew frantic, pleading, bargaining, denying. Emma's cries cut through Claire. "Please, this is my engagement party. You can't ruin it like this." Her mother's tone shifted from sweet to desperate. "Honey, don't do this. We're family. We can talk this out. Just open the door." Even her father's anger cracked into panic. "Think about what you're doing." But Claire's voice was steady, colder than they had ever heard. "I've thought about it. For years I gave you everything I had, money, time, love. And you repaid me with lies, laughter, and betrayal." She paused, letting the silence press down on them like a weight. Then, with the calm finality of a judge delivering a sentence, she spoke. "You no longer have a place in my life. From this moment on, you are nothing to me." The chaos on the other end dissolved into stunned silence. No more bargaining, no more excuses, just the hollow sound of a family realizing their grip had slipped away. Claire didn't shout, she didn't cry. She simply ended the call, her finger pressing the screen with the same finality as slamming a door. And outside the house, her family stood stranded, forced to pack up their food, their flowers, their decorations, carrying away the wreckage of their own greed. They had come expecting a celebration. Instead, they left in humiliation, the echoes of Claire's words, following them like a curse. "You are nothing to me." 6 months had passed, and Claire's life no longer felt like a battlefield. The country house, once a symbol of chains and manipulation, was now listed as a vacation rental. Families she had never met filled it with laughter, barbecues, and holiday cheer, and every month the rental income flowed into her account. For the first time in years, the house wasn't draining her, it was supporting her. Her own apartment felt lighter too. No phone calls late at night begging for emergency money. No guilt-tripping messages about how she wasn't doing enough for the family. Her phone was quiet now, blissfully silent, except for calls from colleagues, new friends, and people who actually cared about her. That silence, once terrifying, had become her peace. Claire woke up each morning without the crushing weight of obligation pressing on her chest. She cooked breakfast for herself, drank her coffee slowly, and even started painting again, something she hadn't done since college. The colors flowed freely on the canvas, mirroring the freedom she felt inside. She no longer measured her worth by how much she could give to others. Instead, she was learning to measure it by how much joy, calm, and dignity she gave herself. Looking back, Claire finally understood something she had never dared to admit before. Love does not mean allowing yourself to be used. Family should be a place of safety, not a prison built from guilt and manipulation. Trust is not infinite. It is the most precious currency we have, and once it is broken, it cannot simply be restored with empty words. She realized that protecting herself did not make her selfish, it made her strong. Setting boundaries did not mean she loved her family less. It meant she finally loved herself enough to stop the cycle of abuse. The Claire who once cried in silence at night had grown into a woman who could stand tall in her own truth, unshaken by guilt, unafraid of walking alone. And in that strength, she discovered freedom. Her story was not just about betrayal, but about rebirth. Because sometimes the harshest lesson we learn is also the one that sets us free. You cannot force people to value you. You can only value yourself enough to walk away when they don't. Sometimes losing people isn't the tragedy we think it is, it's the freedom we didn't know we needed. Claire's story is proof that walking away can be the most powerful form of love for yourself. Because no matter who it is, family, friends, or anyone else, if they cross the line between love and exploitation, it is your right to draw that boundary. Remember, these boundaries are not walls. They are doors you choose when to open and when to close. And in closing them, to those who only wish to take you, are opening them to a life of respect, dignity, and true connection. Protecting your self-worth is not selfish, it is survival and it is strength. So take this lesson with you, your happiness, your peace, your self-respect. These are worth more than anyone's approval, and sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply to say, enough. Claire's story teaches us something we often forget: love should never come at the cost of your dignity. Family, friends, or anyone close to us should lift us up, not break us down. True love respects boundaries. True connection is built on trust, not guilt. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is say no when saying yes means losing ourselves. Protect your peace, value your worth, and never let others define how much you're worth. If Claire's journey touched you, imagine how many others need to hear this too. Subscribe to Through Her Eyes for more powerful stories that remind us to stand strong, love ourselves, and never settle for less than we deserve. Every story is a mirror, and maybe the next one will be yours.